Today, I want to, well, if you've been looking at the syllabus, you'll know that the lectures are a little bit, getting a little off. I may have to change around the lecture schedule that's listed just to make things a little less sort of, my grandmother would use the term cattywampus. Today, we're going to talk, I think, a little bit about the Roman civic cult, but also about Zosimus and his new history, okay, which you read for today. So for starters, what are we looking at here? What do you think?
World is green.
It is a well-made. Let's see. I can zoom in a little. Okay. Sort of. So look at the iconography that we're looking at. So this is probably, it's not terribly. No, it's okay. I think I just have bad eyes. Look at some of this iconography. See if you can guess what we're looking at. Yeah.
Those gods up top, and then on the bottom, priestesses.
I think that's a pretty good guess. Yeah. What makes you say they're the gods up top?
Well, the trident. I was just assuming that would definitely.
Good.
And then Athena with the spear.
Good. Excellent. Let's see. I think we've got Demeter. Looks like she's holding some wheat there on the end. Not sure. Is that Zeus holding a thunderbolt? So is that Bacchus holding a wine vine? Hard to say. What do we got here? Who's this?
Artemis, how do you say it?
Artemis, good. In good. In Greek, Artemis.
Oh, isn't
what makes you
Artemis
say
two
that?
more down?
Huh?
Isn't Artemis two more down? Isn't she the one holding the bow?
Let's see. I can't see this very well, to be totally honest.
That looks like someone holding a shield and spear.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, so you're right. Thank you. So not Artemis. Who holds a shield and spear? Who else?
Minerva.
Minerva or Athena. Very good. So in Latin, Minerva. In Greek, Athena. Good. And the helmet is the dead giveaway for Athena. Yeah, I would think I thought that was a bow. So this is who you're talking about, right? As Diana or Artemis. What is she the goddess of?
Hunt.
Goddess of the hunt, sort of being wild a little bit, but yeah, goddess of sort of unpeopled spaces. Okay, my eyes aren't good enough, I realize, to do this in extreme detail. Okay, who do we have here? What do you think?
That Hermes or not Hermes. Oh yeah, is that Hermes right there with his staff?
I believe this is Hermes or Mercury. That's right. Good. We talked about him last time. What's he the god of that is more relevant among the Romans than among the Greeks?
Thieves, travelers, roads, and merchants.
Excellent. And why is that relevant for the Romans specifically? What do we talk about?
Lots of commerce, lots of money.
Commerce, road building, exchange, a general sort of comfort with wealth as a status, as a marker of one's value, one's place in the hierarchy. As I said, Rome is an extraordinarily hierarchical society, possibly the most hierarchical society we will cover in the course of this course, or that you will cover in any course ever, which is saying a lot. So the fact that that wealth and commerce and as I said, roads, travelers is a major becomes a status symbol in Rome in a way that sort of had not been precisely understood. At least wealth gained by commerce, wealth gained by conquest would have been a different matter altogether in like most earlier societies. So that's why we talked about Mercury or Hermes last time. All right, we don't have to go through all of these because I need a new prescription for my glasses, apparently. But I wanted to give a slight introduction before we talk too much about Zosimus and his critiques of the Christianization of the Roman Empire. to give a sense of what actually the religion and what role it played in the state actually was. So, as you can see, Rome has a bunch of different gods, right? Does that make it unique in the ancient world?
No.
No, not at all. Of course not. Now, having a bunch of different gods has some pluses and minuses, shall we say, for anyone who wants to centralize authority. So the princeps, the emperor, someone like Augustus, for example. The fact that there are many, many different gods, an entire pantheon, in fact, of gods. Wait, as if I had planned that, which I did, but then I failed to execute it very effectively. Aha. So and I wanted to show you, these are the, this is the forum. That's the Colosseum. Those are the baths. Son of a. There we go. Now I've screwed it up. I hate my life. There we go. Okay. Does anyone know what this is called? This building in Rome?
Yeah.
The Pantheon. Excellent. And so it's called the Pantheon. Why?
The House of the Gods.
Because it's the house of the gods. Good. What do you find in there, do you suspect?
Tributes to all the gods within the pantheon.
Good. So the 12 gods, 12 major gods, and a number of minor deities are represented here in this one building. Okay. So instead of having a temple to Zeus and then another temple, a cultic site to Athena, another one to Diana, Apollo, whoever, instead, some very perceptive and very wealthy, very powerful individual had the idea of putting all of the gods into a single room, and not only doing that, but constructing this building in a way that was quite avant-garde, very sort of very modern by Roman standards. Can anyone tell me what it is about this building before we talk more about the gods that makes it so special, weird? Yeah.
Its roof,
Yes, tell me about it.
it's curved, so normally they couldn't do that because physics of that doesn't really work, but the way that they were building it is, it was like slanted as such where it could be basically curved without bending or breaking the rocks below it.
Excellent. So the Romans sort of perfect the use of the arch as a structural technique, like in the engineering that they do. And they start to build these extraordinary cupolas, they're called, they're sort of like domed roofs on their buildings. In theory, being quite effective as a structural maneuver, because it evenly distributes weight across the entirety of like the spherical surface, right? But there's a problem, which is that the very top, because this is in an actual sphere, nothing is supporting it. So this part, in previous eras, the very top of the roof would have imploded and collapsed. The Romans come up with a series of structural innovations that are not relevant for this class, that including the ability to cut a hole in the top of the roof so that not only does light come in, but also it at least partially prevents this sort of downward force that the top of the roof would have had from being an issue, right? So it creates this really, really extraordinary sensation when you go inside this building. It's very, very impressive. Now, another thing, though, that I want to point out is you will notice this if you go to Rome, if you go to anywhere, and you want to point out the difference between Roman and Greek architecture. One of the differences is that Greek architecture, Greek temples in particular, but basically all public buildings, were extremely regular and rigid in the way that they were constructed. Okay, they had an exact number of columns, like they were built rectangularly, and they had a number of columns to, like, on the short side of the rectangle to the long side of the rectangle. That was a rigidly observed ratio. Okay, I can't remember off the top of my head what the ratio was, but it was always the same number. And anytime you would start doing fancy things, like the Greeks figure out that if you start building the columns slightly outward, like sort of at a slight angle, it from a distance creates the impression of the building being much more sort of impressive, that of sort of standing out from the landscape. The roof line stands out from the landscape in a much more impressive way than if you actually build them straight. As you move away, they start to appear to curve inward so that it starts to look more diminutive from a distance. So those kinds of things create some sort of structural problems in trying to maintain this exact, what is understood through the discovery of Euclidean geometry and things to be this like ideal and perfected ratio that will be very pleasing to the gods in the way they construct public and sacred architecture. The Romans take all of those forms, take those shapes, they take the Doric and Corinthian and Ionic columns, these sort of classical type styles of columns that you'll see sometimes, these triangular pitched roofs, the frescoes that they paint paint on the front. But the Romans are much more practical and adaptable than the Greeks had been in kind of all things, including religion, but certainly in engineering. And they say, hey, sure, this is completely antithetical to the old traditional style of how you would please the gods by having this perfected set of rectangles, these perfect geometries, these perfect symmetries. But why not? We can just put this sort of square entryway on this like rounded dome. As long as we put the god statues in there, it's pretty cool. It's pretty impressive. Nothing wrong with that. So these innovations in architecture should be understood in a broader context of also being innovations in terms of ideology, in terms of the relationship between the public and the private, and religious innovation as well. So who do you think had the idea of putting all of the gods in one spot?
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
It was the emperor. Which one?
Augustus.
Augustus. Good. Yeah. So centralizing the authority of all 12 gods, major gods of the pantheon in one place under the patronage of the emperor, in some ways also has the effect of placing those gods beneath the emperor in a certain sense, right? Because it is he who, actually effected this, putting them there, this devotion. And the fact that it was a problem that there were too many gods potentially for a single authority to consolidate power over, why would that be a problem? What do the multiple gods imply for society and how society worked and what people what their relationship was to the religion?
It was divided.
Divided, indeed. Like on a practical level, what would it mean day to day to have multiple gods? Yeah.
There's more than one ultimate source of authority.
There's more than one ultimate source of authority. Good. Exactly. If there's a dispute between Hera and Zeus, as there always was, because he cheated on her a lot, who's to say, right? Who's to say who you ought to, appease or whatever with your offerings, that kind of thing. What other problems on a practical level?
More stuff to sacrifice.
There's more stuff to sacrifice. It gets exhausting. There's a lot of public holidays, for example. Certainly. Yeah.
Different groups of people will worship different deities.
Good. So different groups, like if you are associated with, if you're in a guild, for example, like a collection, a certain industry, a certain set of workers, you are probably going to have a certain patron deity. You're going to sacrifice to that deity. You're going to pray to that deity. That's going to be like the main theological avenue you have. And that means that if you are the emperor and you want to maintain sort of a good standing with that group, or you want to maintain the loyalty of those people, or if those people want to demonstrate their loyalty to you, either you as the emperor also need to embrace equally or more so that particular god at the expense of others, or those individuals need to, abandon their own votive practices. In Rome, the way that religion operated, as I mentioned before, was through a series of priestly colleges headed by the office of the Pontifex Maximus. Often, that individual, would be somebody who moved about within the Roman administration. Not just, it wasn't like today where you was like, if you go into seminary, often like you're like a Catholic priest and you go into that career path. Like there are not a lot of priests, Catholic priests, for example, who are running for public office, right? Because it is sort of maintained as a distinct kind of hierarchy, a distinct structure. It's not like, it's very unlikely that the Pope is ever going to run for president, right? Although I think we have an American Pope now, so I suppose technically he could. But it seems very unlikely. In the case of Augustus, the emperor inherits most of the powers of the Pontifex Maximus and becomes himself the high priest. In fact, Caesar, Julius Caesar, who was the sort of prototype that Augustus is following as he institutes the imperial system that he does, had originally, before becoming a general, warlord, had intended to enter the priestly colleges, intended to be a priest, because that was a route to many of the things that imperial conquest and military campaigns would have been as well. Public prestige, power, auctoritas, etc. One of the main things that the priests of the various temples, which were like quasi-private institutions, but to which, in theory, the entire system of Roman government was, beholden to. In theory, the Roman sort of political system was secondary to the Roman religious system, going back to the days of Numa, which you read about via Plutarch in the first week of class. Each of these priestly colleges was this quasi sort of had some independence, at least going into the imperial period. One of the things that they did, in addition to sort of blessing public events, public campaigns, in addition to conferring spiritual legitimacy to office holders, in addition to giving the power to declare war to certain consuls who had been granted imperium, executive authority. One of the main things that they did was, what do you call it? Predictions. Yeah, not prophecy. So augurs is like, would be that. But like,
Foretell?
yes, I don't know why the English word for this is escaping me. But essentially, you would go and you would do things like you would like cut open a chicken and see if it was pregnant. And you would look at the baby, the fetus of the chicken, and then you would say, "This has two heads." That means, as we all know, that tomorrow it's going to rain, and also a senator will be killed by donkey or whatever. That power to offer predictions about the future, basically, auspices, by the way, is the sort of official thing. The power to offer predictions of the future was an extremely important and relevant thing for exercising authority in Rome. So you wouldn't do anything major without consulting some sort of religious authority. You would probably have your preferred priest or priestly college or temple or whatever, what have you, who maybe tended to give you better news than others might, or somebody you trusted, or somebody perhaps, if you were especially devout, who was especially devoted to the particular god who you identified with. But this would not have been an individual decision. This was a collective thing. Okay, you would have typically, preferred the gods of your own familias, your own ancestors, your own sort of social circle, the patron to whom you owed your loyalty. Remember, we talked about Roman society being thought of as kind of series of concentric circles orbiting around a paterfamilias, right? The idea of individual faith as being a major thing was not really that pertinent to most Roman flags, right? Your individual personal beliefs about the gods or about spirituality, about the nature of the universe, the big questions of mankind, were not something that was going to be really of that much concern insofar as your religious duties were concerned. Religios, right? Roman term, the word where we get religion, refers to an obligation, a duty, something you do. There's a public, very, very public form of religion. Your spirituality, on the other hand, your sort of like internal sense of the world and the universe and your place in it, was much more bound up with the philosophers you would read, who would, you know, or the poetry you consumed, the texts that you were engaged with. Not so much in the public rites and offerings that were about sort of appeasing the gods and ensuring that their favor continued to fall on you and on your city of Rome, the Roman Empire. This had begun to change already by the imperial period, by the moment of Augustus. This relationship that the Romans had to their gods, at least in some small pockets, thanks to the advent of what are generally referred to as mystery religions or mystery cults. Has anyone heard this term before? Mystery cults? Can anyone define them or give me a working definition? Yeah?
It's a sect or religious group whose practices and teachings were not written down and were hidden from the rest of society.
Good. Hence they were mysteries, right? And these groups, these mystery cults, started to grow in prominence in the late Greek sort of classical period, but especially became relevant and grew especially among elites of the Greco-Roman world, the broader Mediterranean, as Rome started to expand its borders. And part of that is because so much more interaction, commerce, exchange, people migrating for all kinds of reasons, started to occur between Rome, the sort of northern Mediterranean, and all of the various religious traditions that existed around the Mediterranean at the time and prior to Rome. So Phoenician religion, for example. Obviously, Judaic religions, right? Egyptian religion. The mystery cults usually took some sort of like ancient, like some sort of story, right? Some sort of mythological framework that most people would have been familiar with. Something like Orpheus. If you know the story of Orpheus, he's a wonderful musician who his wife is killed. He descends to the underworld to go get her and to get her back, and is told he cannot he can have her, but he can't look at her until they reach the world of the living again. And of course, this always happens in Greek myths. I just can't hold out until they finally reach the end. He has to see her to make sure it's really her. And of course, in doing so, he loses the opportunity to have her. This story, its associations with the underworld, with life and death, with a cycle, with music, all of these are major elements that you see again and again in various mystery cults that become really important. Others involve the cult of Dionysus, where Dionysus or Bacchus in Rome is the god of wine, but he's also the god of ecstasy, not the drug, although kind of. He's the god of like just general sort of like standing outside of oneself. He's got a mania, right? the god of wildness, the god of lawlessness, the god of sort of like all that is organic and chaotic, right? He's got parties, right? He's a very fun guy to have at a party, but he's also very dangerous in a lot of ways. And so the cult of Dionysus involves going out into the woods periodically, perhaps in like midsummer, something like that, with typically with women would join this cult. They would go out. They would strip naked. They would dance around in like ecstatic reverie. They would presumably consume wine or other psychotropic substances, and they would then consume the body of Dionysus. They would eat the body of the god and drink his blood. And this was obviously seen by the Romans as being very confusing and sort of strange and frightening, and obviously welled up a lot of concerns about women and control of women and female sexuality and all these things. And yet, this was an established cultic mystery religion that was known to have disciples, affiliates, people who practiced it far and wide. But you wouldn't talk about it. It was a mystery. First rule of a mystery cult: don't talk about a mystery cult. And therefore, it's really hard for us to know, as modern scholars, what actually was going on. Are the stories of Dionysus, for example, just the inventions of people who were not invited and imagined all of the fun things that might be happening there, or can we actually trust the sources that we have about the realities of the practices of these mystery religions? Who knows? Demeter is another one, goddess of the harvest, goddess of wheat. And the story of Demeter and her daughter Persephone are that Persephone is so beautiful, she's taken by Hades, the god of the underworld. And Demeter is so sad that she refuses to let anything grow and makes a deal with Hades, basically, that Persephone, the daughter, can return to Earth for half of the year. Hence, in the wintertime, fall and winter, when Persephone is in the underworld, nothing grows, we don't have any wheat, and in the spring and summer, things return. Once again, life, death, bodies, love. All of these themes that seem to have some sort of resonance with people far and wide start to pop up across these different mystery cults, and do kind of start to cause a bit of a problem for the Roman state, Roman elite, because it presents this space of authority that it's really hard for the Roman government to touch, right? If you have a lot of people who are, by the way, that's only a couple of them. There are all kinds of other ones. Mithras, Isis, there's all kinds of mystery cults. But if you have all these people that are worshiping these gods that are, and doing so in a way that is different from what is sort of the official way, and not only doing that, but internalizing something very, very deep, trying to gain some sort of wisdom from these ancient texts, perhaps a belief in the afterlife that is distinct from what is commonly understood in civic religion of Rome. The question becomes, to what extent are subjects of the Roman Empire who are increasingly interested in these cultic practices that are practiced away from the gaze of the state, to what extent are they in fact loyal to the state? Are they in fact loyal to the old gods themselves, to the gods of Rome? To what extent are they actually perhaps, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what's going on. Maybe they're, stepping all over images of Zeus and Athena, etc., and they're going to bring ruin on the city. We just don't know. And so that is the context in which the rise of Christianity in Rome, the Roman Empire, needs to be understood, right? For the Roman state, for the first 200 years, at least, of the existence of pockets, groups of people practicing, this new mystery cult centered around this, prophet from the Levant, in the provinces way out. To what extent are these individuals who are quite open in some cases in defiance of, common practices about, making sacrifices to the emperor, treating the emperor as a god on earth, for example, somewhat disinclined to use money that has the emperor's image on it, because the implication, of course, is that it is the emperor that is conferring value, conferring power in the exchange of money, right? I mean, Jesus was crucified for starting a riot, against commerce in the temple. So there is very little reason for everyday sort of traditional Roman, pagan, civic, religious, observant citizens to think that this, one of many new sort of religious practices that is practiced in secret is going to be anything other than, kind of a sort of a public nuisance every once in a while. It happens, though, that Christianity starts to become more and more popular among first the lower classes, really, of Rome, right around the time that we reach something called the crisis of the 3rd century. And so this is a period, basically a 100-year period, where during the 3rd century, as you might guess, where a lot of the traditional systems of Roman society start to break down. You have a series of bad emperors. You have a series of civil, sort of civil rebellions, functional civil wars, extrajudicial murders. You have revolts in the provinces. You have national disasters. And things just seem to be going quite badly. And it's very, very easy to imagine, therefore, that unlike many of the mystery cults, mystery religions that have been practiced around Rome previously, which were centered on some existing Roman, Greco-Roman, if you want, deity or figure, Orpheus, Demeter, Dionysus, etc. Now you have this religion that's coming from this monotheistic practice already. Jews in the Levant have been causing problems for the Roman emperor because of various religious disputes, resisting Roman cultural practices to the point where Jerusalem is basically destroyed. The temple is destroyed, and most of the Jews in the area are exiled. They've been basically fighting a civil war in the Levant for, what, by that time almost a century, arguably. And so it's this group that has now produced this new mystery cult where people talk about that they drink, they believe they practice cannibalism, they drink the blood of their god, their deity. Men and women are worshiping simultaneously in the same place, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine someone like Zosimus, who this would be a good time, in fact, to get out some pieces of paper if you haven't already, and prepare before you leave. I'm going to have you write something. Someone like Zosimus believes that the reason for Rome's eventual catastrophe, like not in the 3rd century crisis, but in fact in the 5th century, the ultimate sack of Rome by Alaric the God. It's easy for a devotee of the old Greco-Roman pagan religion to see as the cause of this the rise in popularity of Christianity in the empire. And Zosimus, this is where your writing comes in, singles out the Emperor Constantine as the cause of a lot of the subsequent catastrophe. So I would love you to tell me on a piece of paper that has your name on it. Very important. What Zosimus has to say about Constantine. What does he think? What is his problem with Constantine? You have 10 minutes. I would love, you know, for you to be as detailed as possible in your sense of how Zosimus understands Constantine and the role of Christianity in the crises of the 3rd and 4th centuries.
In a philosophical sense or in a utilitarian sense?
In a sense that gives me a clear certainty that you read and thought carefully about what's Zosimus's new history, which was assigned for today. Z O Z. Thanks.
Thank you.
Not very good at spelling.
ZOSIMUS.
COSIMUS. Thank you.